Do not adjust your television. What you are about to experience is stranger than fiction.
Hey there, strangers, and welcome to Stranger Than Fiction. I am your co-host, Devin.
I'm your co-host, Heidi.
We are the duo behind Channeling Spirits, a YouTube channel where we explore all sorts of spooky things. And this episode is a little bit of a deviation, sort of. Yeah. I thought it's springtime. Winter is thawing.
And Germany.
Well, we don't want to talk about Hitler in this subject because... No, we wanted to explore an urban myth of Walt Disney being frozen.
His head specifically.
And I want to get into that because I guess I remember it more specifically that his head was frozen.
Yeah, not him.
But a lot of what I've read, and we'll get to it, but a lot of what I've read is like his whole body was frozen. But I'd be curious what other people hear. But that's what we're going to be talking about. And what we do in Stranger Than Fiction is we watch a piece of media or an episode of a television show or a movie, something like that, and then we explore what the truth is behind that creature or myth or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so for this, we did something a little different.
Yeah.
We watched Batman the Animated Series, Season 2, Episode 15, Deep Freeze, featuring the one and only Mr. Freeze.
Batman. A new villain has commandeered the Gotham Museum. He's frozen the Antiquities Wing. He's turned the security guards into blocks of ice. He's calling himself Mr. Freeze.
So before we get too far into it, how much of Batman the Animated Series have you seen?
One episode.
No, I've shown you others.
Okay, so 2 episodes.
Okay, so you don't really understand the beauty and the majesty of it, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But I appreciate you watching this. Hopefully it was a little bit better than the real Ghostbusters for you.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, so we're going to jump right into
Heidi's dissection.
All right, so in the beginning,
there
is
was
a robot.
An alley.
There's a robot.
With the Waynes.
There's a robot, and he has freezing capabilities.
Yeah, so he emerges from the water.
And he enters the scene. There's a guard who, instead of notifying people, with a button or something, he blows a whistle, and I called it a rape whistle. Because that's what it was. It was a rape whistle. Let's be real.
It was not like a coach's whistle. It's this long tube,
it was a rape whistle,
as if it could do multiple notes.
Yes, and so he blows the rape whistle, notifying the other guards that a robot is coming to this jail. And so the guards are shooting at the robot, and the robot is like, I'm done with this. He helicopters them. Yeah. He extends his arms out, and he just goes, shoo, shoo, shoo,
he just slaps them around.
Yeah. And then the robot breaks into Mr. Freeze's cell, and I put robot eats Mr. Freeze, because that's what it looks like.
A compartment
he opens his stomach, and he's like, you're inside me now.
And Mr. Freeze, this is clearly not part of his...
It's not planned.
Yeah, despite having a freeze ray with the robot, he's genuinely terrified.
Yeah. So then Batman and Robin are like, well, that was weird.
That's the most original breakout this year.
Let's go see who knows about robots. And so they go to this guy's house, and this weird bat human bug thing greets them, and it's a robot, but it greets Batman and Robin, and it kisses Robin, and then it just goes,
I just want to help.
It was so weird.
That's Batmite.
I hated it.
I'll tell you more about Batmite later.
So anyway, it's a robot, and this is the robot designer's house, and he's got all these robots as his little personal slaves, bringing him food and giving him massages, and he's like, I don't have company, so I just build little robots as my friends.
Yeah.
Or slaves. And he was like, oh, I know that robot. I built something just like it for this guy, Grant Walker, who is essentially Walt Disney.
He's a Walt Disney analog.
Yeah. Who I used to make his animatronics for his theme park. And so Grant Walker is, the theme park guy. He's Walt Disney. And he's the one who has kidnapped Mr. Freeze.
Grant Walker at your service, sir. This is Oceana, my prototype vision of the future.
So Batman and Robin are like, okay, well, let's go to his lair, which I don't know how they know where it is, but they're like...
I imagine... I don't
or
distinctly
his
remember...
headquarters.
Maybe this is just a well-known Gotham fact that off in the ocean, he's just building this theme park?
Yes. So anyway, from here on out, I will be referring Grant Walker as Walt Disney. Okay?
That's fine.
So Batman and Robin are taking a ship in the middle of the ocean to go to Walt Disney's headquarters.
They're taking a bat ship.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse
me.
The
bat vessel. The bat sub. I don't really know what it's called.
And he sends robo sharks with...
They're like shark torpedoes.
Yeah.
They're like torpedoes that look like sharks.
Yes. After Batman and Robin. And Batman and Robin have scuba masks magically and survive the explosion of their ship. And they're like, all right, well, we'll just swim into the lair.
Well, I imagine it's like having like life preservers if you're on a boat. So, you just got got oxygen, but there's no oxygen.
No, there's no oxygen. It's just magic oxygen. Yeah, it just covers their entire face.
It's like, okay, so the water's not getting in, but that doesn't mean you're breathing, Batman.
Nah, it's fine.
It's cool.
So Walt, essentially, why he's kidnapped Mr. Freeze is he wants to become like him. He wants to be immortal like Mr. Freeze.
He mentions that like the cryogenic process that affected Mr. Freeze essentially makes him immortal.
Yeah.
Do you realize that in your frozen state you'll age much slower than an ordinary human? You're practically immortal, my friend.
And so he's like, I want to be like you, ooh. And Mr. Freeze is like, nah, you don't. And he's like, well, I've got your wife, so you're going to do it. And he's like, you got me. So...
I wish Mr. Freeze said it and said it like that.
So he does. He has Nora, Mr. Freeze's wife, who they thought died in a fire, but he's like, I have actually been preserving her for this moment. And you're like, what? But okay.
It made more sense to me, I guess, because I know a lot of the Batman lore.
So in Walt's lair, he is talking to his cast members, all wearing the same outfit. I put all very cookie cutter, realistic. Mm-hmm. And he's talking to them about building a new theme park, which is actually a new city, and it's just for his workers. He's like, the world is filled with murder and violence and thievery, so we're just gonna leave all that out there, and we're gonna freeze that city. And he doesn't say we're gonna freeze. He says there's like a freezing coming.
Now, of course, you can't have spring without a little winter. About 5 years of it, I'd say.
Yeah, I was a little confused about his whole plan, because first you're like, okay, so you wanna get frozen to obtain immortality, sure, but then there's this other step where he's like, also I want to freeze the world and have this
have my little world with my cast members.
And they never explain okay, so are these people working? How are they selected? Do they just sign up and they're like, what? Oh, and there's gonna be a frozen apocalypse, a new ice age? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm fine. We've all got our same uniforms.
Yeah. And so Batman and Robin, are obviously trying to break in, and these drones capture them and bring them to the giant TV screen that Walt is projecting from.
Yeah.
He can see them.
Yeah, he watches as they get helicoptered.
That's not how that technology works, but okay. And, being a total villain, he wants to show off to Batman and Robin what he's doing, right? Mm-hmm. His process, instead of just killing them.
No, he's got a monologue. Yeah. He's got to say, this is my plan, and you've got to watch it, but easily foil it by breaking out.
Of course.
I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
So now Walt is frozen like Mr. Freeze. The process in the suit works. He's gone through the whole surgery, if you will, procedure. So now he's like Mr. Freeze, and Mr. Freeze actually lets Batman and Robin go because they tell him that, hey, you don't want to do this. I know you want to be with your wife, but when she does, wake up, she's going to hate you for you destroying the world.
She'll wake up in a dead, frozen world that you helped destroy. She'll hate you for that.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, dang, you're right. And so he helps save the day, and he freezes Walt in place, and then he decides to freeze the theme park city, essentially his lair.
Yeah, I think he overloads what would have been the freezing cannon.
For the actual world. And then he's like, I'm going to freeze his headquarters and freeze him, and magically all the cast members escapes because they had escape yachts ready.
Yeah.
Just on the ready.
Hey, to be fair,
everyone escapes.
It might have been a Plan C evacuation, all right?
And so everyone escapes, and Mr. Freeze stays behind with his wife. He wants to be with her. It's very sweet.
And there's actually like this cool shot at the end that it's like almost like a snow globe. And then they pan in and, you know, Freeze is kind of looking
it with his wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, who's also frozen in a sense.
She's like in a suspended animation tank.
Yeah. And so Walt is at the bottom of the ocean, still frozen, but he can like move his head around and scream at a fish.
Yeah, like there's this little fish that comes up to investigate him.
Yep.
I'm like,
while Mr. Freeze is chilling with his wife.
Let's cool it for now.
The end.
So this was the second appearance of Mr. Freeze. So
yeah, I think you had me watch the first one.
Yeah, and it's called Heart of Ice. And so I guess I should probably just get into behind the screams.
Woo!
Woo! I think we're skipping around because we didn't do our review, but I love this episode. But going back to, so in Heart of Ice, before this, Mr. Freeze was just kind of a bumbling villain. Mm-hmm. So back in the 50s and 60s, there was all sorts of ridiculous Batman stories. Like he would go back in time, he'd fight dinosaurs, he would have rainbow-colored costumes.
Yeah, he would.
And he would fight a lot of really ridiculous villains. Now, back then, Joker and Riddler and all, like none of them really had teeth, but these were like absurd villains. That's where Polka Dot Man came from.
So stupid.
That's where like a lot of the really ridiculous. So there was this villain called Mr. Zero. He wasn't Mr. Freeze, but it was just kind of a weird gimmick. He's like, I freeze things. I think he had like a pink costume, or he looked really ridiculous. And he was killed off in the 80s, I think like late 80s, early 90s. And because they're like, we don't know what to do with him. He's just kind of this joke character. And then 1993 or so, Heart of Ice debuts, and Paul Dini, the writer, really reimagined him as this tragic character that has this tragic backstory. He wants to save his wife. This accident happens that causes him to be this cold, chilling figure. And it really, that was later adapted into the comics, and it revitalized and, you know, unthawed him. I don't know.
All right, everyone, chill.
And really brought Mr. Freeze into kind of the upper echelon of Batman villains, rather than being this joke, like D-list villain. Really made him a heavy hitter. It was nominated, maybe won an Emmy, and then they didn't really want to do anything because it's like, this is such a great episode, Mr. Freeze. Like, we don't want to ruin his character by having him like be a reoccurring villain. Mm-hmm. You know, he kind of had a good send off at the end. Like, unless we can really do a very good follow up, we don't want to keep using Mr. Freeze. Mm-hmm. So this is the second appearance of him. And
are there more?
There was a movie called Sub-Zero, and he appeared in Batman Beyond, which was like a future sequel series where a new Terry McGinnis took over. And I think there he is actually a frozen head. So going kind of back into the weird frozen head Walt story, but they didn't do a whole lot. I don't know if there were any other appearances offhand, but they wanted to keep it, you know, Mr. Freeze pretty intact. Mm-hmm. So I really liked this one. I hadn't seen it in a few years.
Yeah, it was good. It was heartfelt.
Yeah, there were, you know, I like Freeze's motivation.
Yeah, I get it.
And the problem with telling a lot of Mr. Freeze stories is you really can't. Like, there's only so far, like, he can be manipulated, be like, we have your wife, haha, you have to do what we say. And I think it's good to use him in small doses like this.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think this was a great follow-up. I think it takes him in a different direction because in the first episode, and I know you haven't seen it in a long time, he really is pretty villainous, and you realize there is a motivation. And this really kind of turns him, like, he's very resistant to want to work with Walt Disney, and he's not necessarily an antagonist against Batman and Robin, but he does freeze them to kind of stop them because, like, he's like, I want my wife to be okay.
Yeah, sweet.
But then you see this then change of character, and he's like, I just want to be with my wife. I just want to be left alone.
I've done what you wanted. Now leave me alone with my wife.
You know, stop it. So I thought, you know, having Walt Disney as this secondary or primary antagonist using Mr. Freeze, but again, like, I wouldn't want to see too many more stories.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count Mr. Freeze as the villain in this. The villain in this is Walt Disney.
Yeah, And, he's kind of, his motivations is definitely not as villainous as the first episode. And, you had asked, he's like, well, is he a villain? And I'm like, well, he's definitely an antagonist, maybe an anti-villain, but I really enjoy it. The design of Mr. Freeze for the animated series was done by Mike Mignola, who was the creator of Hellboy. And I love him as an artist. So it's a cool little, you get kind of old 60s feel of it, but it's not ridiculously goofy.
Well, I love the goofy 60s.
I know. You'd love some of those ridiculous Batman comics where he fights Polka Dot Man.
Pam.
Pam?
I meant Bam.
Yeah.
And Pow at the same time.
Yeah. So speaking of which, the 1966 series of Batman is actually what named where he went from Mr. Zero to Mr. Freeze. They called him Mr. Freeze in that series.
Got it.
And there is an episode called Deep Freeze, which this is also called in homage to that.
Oh.
Yeah. So, fun little ties to the goofiness of the 60s series, but, again, taking a character and making him a lot better.
Love it.
Before I get too far, we probably should do our review because we're doing this out of order. So we're gonna backtrack a little bit. So, how many Walt Frozen heads would you give this episode?
7.
That is maybe the best rating you've given without looking it up.
I liked it. It was really sweet.
I will give it an 8.
Okay.
I thought about
why you always gotta one up me.
I love one-upping you. I do. No, I don't think this is as good as Heart of Ice, the first episode. I definitely know that there are my favorite Batman animated series episodes are Heart of Steel. And so that robot guy, Rossum, he's like a character that's appeared in other episodes, including Heart of Steel as like a robot maker.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this is an amazing series. My personal opinion, the best portrayal of Batman. You've asked me before, who's my favorite Batman, and I stand by Kevin Conroy, specifically in this series.
It's not Robert Pattinson.
It's not Robert Pattinson.
He did okay.
I didn't think he was not as bad as I thought, but overall, yeah, I think there are so many good episodes, so it's hard for me to give this a straight 10 out of 10. And I do think there's motivational issues that I have with Walt Disney's character that I'm well, you didn't really explain that. You just kind of he's a bad guy. Don't worry. Just he wants to freeze things too.
I'm the bad guy. Duh.
So this episode originally aired on November 26, 1994. It was directed by Kevin Alaterry.
Ah, my favorite.
He was a storyboard artist for 26 episodes of The Real Ghostbusters, so a little connection there.
Yay.
And a storyboard supervisor for 13 of them. The teleplay was done by Paul Dini, who was the same writer who wrote Heart of Ice. He also co-created Harley Quinn, who first appeared in the animated series before she made her way into comics and movies and all sorts of other media.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was just kind of a goofy side character to Joker in the animated series and gained a following and now has practically her own movie, apparently. Yeah. But Paul Dini is a great writer, did a lot of great episodes for this, including this one. So Dr. Carl Rossum, the robot guy, he is voiced by someone you know. The actor's name is William Sanderson. If I said he's someone in True Blood, do you know who he is?
Oh, no, tell me.
He's the sheriff, Sheriff Bud.
Oh my God, Sheriff Bud Dearborn.
Yeah.
All I make anymore are little friends to keep me company.
Love it.
So I thought you'd enjoy that.
That's fantastic.
I'm sure if you heard it again, you'd be like,
sure.
oh, yeah, I can hear it.
Oh, I love him.
Yeah. So that the fun little piece of trivia for you. Obviously, there's a lot of parallels with Grant Walker and Walt Disney. So Walker referred to his theme park designers and builders as Visioneers as opposed to Imagineers. So pretty close little...
Pretty on par there.
Yeah, wink little there.
He even had the Walt mustache.
Yeah. And so you had a very similar appearance. You also have this kind of idea of a world of tomorrow, which, goes to Epcot, Tomorrowland. Walt was often seen as a futurist and looking towards what that, hopefully optimistic future would be.
Yeah, and Epcot was supposed to be where his people lived.
Yes.
So it's literally on par.
Yeah, the original Epcot was an acronym that meant Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
And it still means that.
No, it's right now the actual like design is lower or capital E, rest lowercase, because it's no longer an acronym.
What?
If you're a big fan of style guides and design, that is the technical nomenclature way to write Epcot. This is the things I learned working there.
I don't like this.
Okay. But the reason it's no longer an acronym is because it's not a community. It was designed to be a kind of a self-functioning town. There was a lot of logistical problems that were presented to Walt. Be like, well, like people would need to be able to like vote, and they could vote against the interests of Disney World. Like, do you really want to empower that? Like, there would be a mayor, and Walt was really big on control.
Men like Walker are obsessed with getting their own way, and they don't let little things like the law stop them.
And so for him, like, he just had this vision where it would be this utopia, and he didn't really acknowledge, even though people would present him, be like, there's a lot like that wouldn't work. Like, this would be really hard to do and probably not functionally. And ultimately he passed away, and Epcot changed very much. But you see kind of a similar philosophy or flawed philosophy with Grant Walker, where he wants to create this Oceania.
Because reasons.
Yeah, it's kind of nebulous, I guess, to, have a beautiful future, and by doing that, we're going to freeze the rest of the world, or just Gotham? Fine. I don't know, was the freeze
But, like, also, why couldn't they just all live on this little island and, like, forget about the rest of the world?
I don't know. Maybe
they don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah, like, be like, no, we're on thing. Don't worry about us. Where would they get their food? Like, I don't know. I want to know how this self-functioning island
robots
attraction. Yeah, they have all these robot servants that I guess will help them. But so you had similars there. And, lastly, of course, and most important to us is the urban legend that Walt Disney was frozen, which is what Grant Walker wanted to kind of have that cryogenic enhancement like Mr. Freeze, so he too could become immortal in that way. You talked about the creepy little Batman toy.
Hated it.
So that's Batmite. In the comics, and probably from like the goofy 60s, he was a weird fifth dimensional imp that always wanted to like, meddle or help Batman, and he was always just kind of this weird character.
I don't like it.
That little Batmite was voiced by Pat Fraley, who also voiced Krang in the Ninja Turtles, the brain thing.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I know that means...
I was like, what?
So, you and I have a close connection. History. We both worked at and met each other at Walt Disney World.
Oh my god, what?
What?
I thought we met in Asia.
Oh, Asia.
I mean, technically, we did.
We were working in Asia when we met, but...
At Animal Kingdom.
Yeah, so I worked all 4 parks. I worked there for several years. You worked kind of all 4.
At all 4 parks.
You technically did as well. So it's for us kind of laughable, the idea that like Walt Disney would be frozen, but we also really kind of know more than we should about Walt Disney and the company.
So ominous.
How it runs. Like, well, I say there's other things you should do with your time than learn about Walt Disney. I'll tell you that much. So, for that, we'll probably, sprinkle in some of that. I especially want to hear, like, did you know about this urban legend before working there?
Yes.
I don't remember, like, where I first heard this.
I heard it because, I was obsessed with Disney before I started working there. And so, like, I would go to Disneyland like every other weekend because I was on the West Coast, and I heard that when I was in high school, probably that Walt Disney's head was frozen, and that it was in California at Disneyland under Pirates of the Caribbean.
And I don't know where I originally like heard this. I feel like it had to be before I worked there. I don't think I ever gave it much stock. Did you ever like think it might be true?
No.
Well, especially frozen head sounds even more ridiculous, but I just like feel like I wonder if it like goes so far back as like when I like saw Austin Powers when I was a kid.
That's what I was thinking.
I was like,
like frozen him.
Yeah, like because I think that was like always the mental image when I was younger of like if I thought of like Walt Disney being frozen, it was like Austin Powers just in a cryo tube.
Yes.
So like it is kind of funny to think of like that setting just under pirates.
Yes.
So yeah. For us, I think it's a little bit more ridiculous.
Silly.
I'd be curious if anyone has ever believed this.
Or actually believes it.
Or still believes it. And there's some reasoning there. And so without any further ado, let's get to
the truth.
Much as you try to bury it, the truth is out there.
Oh, no.
Oh. So here's the urban legend. Walt Disney was a man obsessed with the future. From Disneyland's Tomorrowland to his proposed experimental prototype community of tomorrow, naturally he would be interested in state-of-the-art advances in science. Hoping to see the tomorrow he often dreamed of, Disney agreed to place himself in suspended animation. But after years of smoking, Walt's body had deteriorated beyond what was believed to be salvageable, even with the future of medical advances, so only his head was frozen.
What year did he die?
We'll get into that. So on November 2nd, 1966, Walt entered St. Joseph Hospital in California for pain in his leg and neck. And when they were doing, the tests and x-rays, they found a walnut-sized spot on his left lung and advised that he go into surgery immediately.
Probably because he smoked a lot and it was lung cancer.
Yes, very much so. So he underwent surgery on November 7th, so 5 days later, and doctors found his lymph nodes were inflamed, and that was just an indicator that pretty much he didn't have long to live.
Aww.
And he did kind of go back to the studio and try and work for a while, but unfortunately, on December 15th, 1966, then he passed away. So the subject of cryonics was brought to the attention of the public, really with a publication in 1964, so 2 years before his passing, by Robert C.W. Ettinger, who wrote The Prospect of Immortality. And in this book, it really pretty much tried to draw on every available information about cryonics, and it really kind of talked about some of the practical, the legal, the ethical, and the moral impact of if you froze and then revived a human being. And there is a lot to be said on that. If laws have changed, ethically speaking, how do we deal with this person? How do you raise someone from the dead? Mm-hmm. So it's not that was maybe feasibly it was an impossibility, but it was not impossible that Walt wouldn't have been aware of it. Now, 2 years to kind of be aware of that, I don't know if he knew, but nothing really indicates that he ever spoke of it, ever showed an interest, or in any way this was Walt's idea.
But it's not a thing, right?
It is theoretically a thing.
Yeah, so it's not a thing, and we're, 40 years later?
I don't know offhand, because I didn't do a huge deep dive.
I'm just saying,
cryonics.
In the 60s, there's no way.
But it was kind of that idea of the impossible. And so I don't know if anyone has ever been frozen, but I think the theoretical idea was you would replace the blood in the system and then insert antifreeze. Obviously, this is done, while the person or patient is kind of anesthetized, and the antifreeze then would preserve the tissue as it was frozen. Now, the hard part would be antifreeze is deadly, so how do you drain that from someone and then replenish them with blood and then, get the heart and the organs all working back to the way they should be? So all of that is very difficult. So even if, there was a way that, let's say Walt was, suffering from a medical disease that then in 2022 could be feasible, even if we could solve that part of it, unfreezing him still to this day, and my knowledge, is not feasible.
Well, there is a list of people who have arranged for cryonics.
Okay, but these are not people who have been necessarily frozen.
It just says list of people who plan to be cryopreserved.
Is there anybody interesting?
Wait, deceased people who have been cryopreserved.
Okay, so there you go. So
Walt Disney's not on this list.
Oh, spoilers.
I don't know any of these people.
Okay, well, so there you go. So we do have individuals who have been cryogenically frozen.
A psychology professor.
Ooh. And some people who apparently plan to. I'd be curious on how you arrange that.
You have to die first, it says, minutes within death.
Well, yeah, but I mean, how do you arrange and say, I'm going to go to my lawyer and be like,
when you're signing up to donate organs.
You've got a checkbox. It's just are you an organ donor? Yes. No. Also, cryogenically freeze me.
Ted Williams, who is a baseball player.
EA Sports. I thought you were going to say someone like Elon Musk.
No.
That seems like some weird thing that he'd do.
But yeah, there are people who are frozen.
Okay.
Oh, I want to find out how much this costs. We're diving into this.
Oh my goodness. See, to me, it reminds me of, do you remember Vanilla Sky?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of Vanilla Sky, a little bit of spoilers if you've never seen that movie, but part of it has to deal with being cryogenically frozen and the dreams or visions within that. But
all right, so it costs around $200,000 for full body cryopreservation and $80,000 for neuropreservation.
So you could get frozen and your brain could just be unsalvageable if you didn't pay enough?
Yeah.
Wow, that stinks. I that doesn't sound like as much as it should be, especially considering like how much I feel funerals and like all that costs. Like, how much does a cremation cost?
Let me find out.
No, we don't need.
Can you really cheat death? Sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole now.
Okay, so while Heidi goes down her rabbit hole, we'll talk a little bit more about Walt Disney.
You can freeze your pet too.
No. Yeah, Mr. Bigglesworth.
Be frozen with your pet.
It's frickin' freezing in here, Mr. Bigglesworth.
So the question is, was Disney obsessed with death? And that's kind of part one of...
I don't think so.
Well, that's what, where it starts, is this idea that Walt was obsessed with death, and therefore that's kind of what drove his interest in future technologies and in a future. And then therefore, then the logical end is then he used this state-of-the-art technology to freeze himself. That's kind of, so the first part of this myth is, yes, he was. Now, is that true? So supposedly, I don't know if this is true. I think this comes from a more credible biography.
Okay.
But apparently, he was told by a fortune teller that he would die when he was 35. Which is pretty terrifying, and if you do adhere to that, well, yes, obviously he did survive past, but apparently he would brood about his inevitable demise during occasional bouts of depression, and this is even after he passed the age of 35 when he was supposedly going to die. But I think like all of us, you get into depression, you start worrying about your legacy. So I don't think that means he was obsessed with death, and I don't think that's any more unusual than any other person in a depressive episode. Like, okay, yeah, sure, we all kind of worry about that when we're bummed, and that just makes us more bummed. But I would say obsessed, no. Was it aware? Sure. Like, yes, he thought about his death and had a weird encounter of a fortune teller. So the idea of some of this rumor helped spread was by two sources of Disney biographies. There's one who's Leonard Mosley, and he wrote a book in 1986 called Disney World, and there was also Mark Elliott, who wrote in 1993 Walt Disney, Hollywood's Dark Prince.
Oh.
So according to Mosley, and these are just kind of bunk biographies with a lot of issues to them, but
okay.
Quote, the surgeons had taken away his diseased lung to examine it, and then were going to preserve it. Walt was pleased when he had heard that. He knew enough about cryogenesis to be aware that it was important to hold on to all the organs just in case the surgeons needed to treat them before putting them back where they belonged. So the first question is, did he have organs removed? And the answer is yes.
Yeah,
tissue samples were removed, but they weren't preserved in cryogenic chambers. They were put in formaldehyde. So that part is already nonsense. Nothing to our knowledge showed that he had this interest in this technology. And
also, wouldn't he be listed as one of the many people frozen?
Also, if you took out his entire lung, like, you're not breathing, buddy. I don't think you're thinking about cryogenesis. But Mosley continues, and this is where the mystery begins. It was Walt himself who had asked Roy Disney to keep his illness secret, but the manner in which the world was apprised of his death remains surprising. In fact, it was not until hours after he was declared dead that an announcement was made. First came radio announcements, then a curt official notice informed the press and public that Walt Disney was no more. It added that there would be no funeral. He had already been cremated, the announcement said, and his ashes interred in Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Only immediate family members had been present. So this idea that, like,
that's kind of weird.
Not necessarily, and I'll get to that. But yes, if you kind of present this mystery of Walt's obsessed with death, and then he's telling his brother that I want to be frozen, and then there's all of a sudden this gap of time in between his actual death and then the public announcement, and then to say he's already been cremated and there's no funeral and don't worry about it. But the problem is that's pretty standard when there is like a person of importance who passed away. Like they're not going to immediately text out to the media and say, "Hey, just so you know, William Shatner has passed away." And there's going, because you want family to be able to know this,
of course, not find out through social media. I get it.
Yeah, and so. And you're also dealing with 1966, so you're dealing with information didn't get out that easily, that people were still getting, information and news from radios and newspapers that might be published, a day after even hearing of that event. So there's going to be some time that has passed, and pretty much what had happened is 2 days after his passing, that's when he was cremated. And this on his death certificate, and you can pull it up, it does say cremated on there. It doesn't say he was frozen.
Frozen.
And so
head severed.
I think if you're already believing this, you could easily be like, well, the doctor's in on it and da-da-da-da. But there's also a money trail. Like there's a pretty definitive proof that no, like he was cremated.
Yeah.
This announcement happened because it was in 1966. There's a little bit of delay of news, and there's also people who are going to be informed first.
I feel bad for the cast members, like having to work that day, finding out. Like, what a gloomy day at Disneyland.
Yeah, I mean, so it would have been interesting to, hear that passing, and it's like, how do you keep going that day? And it's like, well, like the man who was named after this, like the captain of the ship, is no more.
You think that in his honor, though, they would have closed the park that day?
And in his honor, the venture capitalist that he was, they would have been like, we're going to keep we're going to keep it open later. We're going to have a 24-hour Disney
celebration
day in honor of his death. Walt would have wanted that way. But his daughter Diane also wrote in 1972, there is absolutely no truth to the rumor that my father, Walt Disney, wished to be frozen. I doubt that my father had ever even heard of cryonics. So we already know that this rumor went back to 1972. It was persistent enough that literally his daughter had to make a statement and be like, stop this nonsense. Mm-hmm. So it had already been going on for a while. So how far back do you think it went?
What do you mean?
Like the rumor of that Walt was frozen.
Maybe that same year he passed?
Okay. So in early 1967, a few weeks after his death, a reporter from a tabloid called the National Spotlight claimed he snuck into St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, the same one where Walt was treated and passed away. And the reporter said he disguised himself as an orderly, broke into the storage room, and saw the deceased Disney suspended in cryogenic metal cylinders. So this...
I think we believe a tabloid magazine.
But that's how things start. So that's how far back it goes, is literally weeks after this guy is just like...
What a fucker.
Hey.
Sorry. What a douche.
Hey, I saw Walt Disney frozen when I snuck in to, I don't know, try and get a comment from him on his deathbed.
How do you feel about dying, sir?
I don't like it. So then the rumor again appeared in a French magazine, and I'm not even gonna...
Les Incompetents.
Icy Paris is what it looks like.
What?
ICI Paris. I'm sure it's like Ici Paris. But...
Icy Paris, talking about frozen heads.
I got Icy Paris. In 1969, they claimed that essentially one Disney publicist had suggested that this rumor had been started by some Disney studio animators who had a bizarre sense of humor. Take that as you will. Maybe, this tabloid actually picked up on a rumor, from some odd animators, but the earliest written form that we know of is that tabloid, but then people, continued to persist on that. In 1975, the National Tatler predicted that they predicted that he was going to be thawed in 1975.
Well, he wasn't.
He was not. So then that comes flash forward into I Want to Believe.
Now I'm a believer.
Because last year, a Facebook post was going around
saying that he was going to be thawed
in December of 2021. So for those of you who would believe this nonsense, or for those, who still have never heard that it's not true, I posed this question, with all these facts, do you still believe that Walt was frozen somehow in secret?
I think he's cremated and in his grave.
Yep. I would agree. I personally never really put much stock into the idea. Until literally we looked it up, I didn't know that people had actually been cryogenically frozen with probably the intention of being unfrozen.
Yeah, that's what it says. Like they have plans. Like this one girl, her father was frozen, and so she didn't want him to be lonely, so she signed herself up too.
But that'd be like an Interstellar moment where all of a sudden, you'd be like, wait, you're my daughter, but you're as old as I am.
It's
I
weird.
didn't want you to be lonely. So I'd be curious on other people. Did you see that Facebook post and kind of had to double check and go, wait, is that true? It's not. I could say that with pretty big certainty.
Yes, me as well. My question for you is, would you get cryogenically frozen?
I don't know.
No, the answer is no, Devin.
What? Why not?
No.
Well, clearly your answer is no. Why wouldn't you?
You know my plan.
I guess, but okay, let's say you could be brought back. It's 2075.
I don't want to be here in the future. The world is going to go down in flames.
No, the world is better now. You don't
on Mars.
You have robot servants
on
that
Mars.
work as well as an Echo device where you just have to yell at them a few times. You're no longer working. You take a pill for your whole diet. Everyone looks beautiful. It's perfect. You wouldn't want to come back to that magical future where, you can live young and happily?
No. Are you there?
I don't know. I don't believe...
Okay. I only want to be there if you're there. I don't want you to be lonely.
That's fair. I don't know.
Only if I can bring Juju.
I don't think I would do, space travel to Mars, but I might freeze myself.
What is wrong with you?
What? You would go to Mars, but you wouldn't get frozen?
The answer is no. You're not...
I'm going to write my own will, and I'm going to be frozen just for that.
All right, well, you know what I want in my will, so...
Okay.
We'll both get our wishes.
So, I mean, I will say, just based on the fact that, you do have some idea of the issue of cryonics was published before Walt's passing, is it possible he may have known about it? Yes.
Yeah, he could have known about it, but that doesn't mean he did it, or that it would be feasible for him to come back.
Well, but... I will say that the first suspended animation did take place after Disney's death in 1967. So, it wasn't that far off. Yeah. So, the idea of, could it have technologically happened that Walt could have been frozen? Does it make sense with his personality? I'll grant you all those. Is there a, quote, weird dead time in between his passing and when his death was announced where someone could have done this process and they want to keep it a secret? Yes, I can concede all those, but I think that's nonsense, personally.
Yeah.
I know there are some people who want to believe in those conspiracies
and
that
good
we
for
didn't land
you.
on the moon.
Go, what? No.
No, I'm saying, that to me is this level of, if you've kind of believed that bunk, I think you're a susceptible person. Nah, that's just me, but I don't buy it. I might do it, might get frozen myself.
For no reason. I'm not paying for that.
It's
$200,000. That's a doubt. That is.
I want the cranial tissue preserver model.
Just for $80,000. No, you just get to preserve your nerves.
Oh, I want the whole package. I want the $200,000. I want it. Just put it on my credit card. I'll pay it off when I get unfrozen, like Fry from Futurama. All right. Well, let us know if you believe in Walt's frozen head. Oh, we didn't get to. So I never got to tell you the story, though, of when I literally was working. And under Magic Kingdom in Florida, there is a system of tunnels that cast members use. It's called the Utilidors.
Oh, my God. And it's not glamorous at all. And it smells.
It smells like trash because there's a trash system down there. It's really kind of gross and creepy.
And dark.
When I was training at Jungle Cruise, my trainer took me around where under Pirates of the Caribbean was, and he just pointed at this blank wall and or it might have been a trash compactor, and he's like, and that's where Walt Disney's frozen head is. And so for me, I think of it more that he was frozen, or he was buried under Disney World, but you had always heard.
Yeah, it's Disneyland.
But
that's his park.
But I don't understand why Pirates, whether either coast, is so specific. Like,
I know,
why
that's
not?
Really weird.
Like, It's a Small World. Like, to me, it's always under Pirates.
Yeah.
So let us know if you've heard other versions of it. I'd be curious if you know some other fun details or if you believe it. But thanks for joining us.
Freeze you later.
That wasn't even good. That was like Batman and Robin level of ice pun.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
Pow.
Chill. Catch you later. Bye.
Bye.